Well, good Sunday morning to everyone. I wanted to do some videos about a subject that I've been really deeply involved with for a lot of years, which is screenwriting. Um, I have spent a lot of time, ever since I was a kid, writing, doing some kind of writing, And then I got into the whole screenplay thing, decided to kind of turn my focus from writing novels and stuff over to that, and had some success in terms of working with people, getting a screenplay to the point of being optioned and so forth, But what I wanted to do was just some basic kind of introductory stuff to the idea of screenwriting and how to work in that particular format, especially for people who are new at it and just starting out and want to try and figure out how to make a success of it, And the main thing I wanted to focus on is, how to just put together a story that has some kind of forward momentum and actually moves and gets you, as a story has to, from point A to point B. A lot of times it's very easy to just wander around in circles when you're writing a story. So there are certain techniques that you can use to make sure that doesn't happen. I originally was going to make a video kind of talking about how to, kind of overlay several different strategies and combine those things. What I wanted to do in this video is I decided to kind of break things down into separate sections and just start with the very basics of the format and kind of the basic structure that people are looking for. And that's the 3-act structure, which most of you who are interested in the subject probably are familiar with it to at least some extent. And one of the basics that you'll always hear people talk about was a book by Sid Field called Screenplay, and his paradigm as far as screenplay structure. A lot of people through the years have tried to get away from that in terms of the way that he laid it out in his book. They felt it was a little bit too specific and constraining or whatever. This has to happen on this page and so forth. But a lot of the stuff that's come since then has really been just people trying to change it for the sake of being able to put their name on a new kind of thing and sell books about that, The basic ideas of what he said still hold true, and they've held true for, hundreds or maybe even thousands of years. You'll hear people talk about Aristotle's Poetics and the hero's journey, and those are things that we'll get into a little bit. But the basic idea of the 3-act structure and the way that Sid Field laid it out, you have a 120-page screenplay. If you're thinking about a 2-hour movie, generally speaking, by the time it gets done and on screen, it averages out to about a minute of screen time per page of screenplay. So, for a 2-hour movie, you're talking about 120 pages. The first 30 pages is the first act, where everything's introduced and the action gets going. The second section is twice as long, 60 pages, and that's where the main body of the action happens, the vast majority of the story. And then the third act, the last 30 pages, everything gets all wrapped up, bring things to a satisfying conclusion, hopefully. But within those 3 acts, he had certain different waypoints or items that he picked, basically placed on certain pages along that line. Right at the very start, the first few pages, you'll have what's called the inciting incident. And that's the thing that incites the story, makes the rest of the story possible. If you do a really good job and come up with a really well-planned story, you could possibly say that it doesn't just make the rest of the story possible, but it makes it necessary, The rest of the story has to happen after that incident takes place. Up around, I think he said, page 27 in his book, right near the end of the first act, you'll have plot point 1, which is where something happens that kind of hooks into the story and pulls it off into a totally different direction and really gets things going. In the middle of the story, the midpoint of Act 2 and the midpoint of the movie as a whole you'll have another major plot point that once again kind of changes everything and takes you off in a different direction. And this should be kind of like a pretty major revelation or something. When you get to the end of the second act and going into the third act, right around page 90 or a little before, you'll have another plot point 3, where once again this is the final change, where kind of takes you off maybe in a new direction again, but it really gets you going off into the finale of the movie. And then from there on out, it's just kind of a headlong rush toward the end of the movie and the climax. The climax may happen not quite exactly at the end of the movie. You might have a few pages after that where there's a little bit of a denouement, or whatever you want to call it, to kind of wrap things up and get the characters settled back in to the aftermath of the story. But we want to look at those basic things, because if you have those, if you have your main storyline really laid out well and all of those items are present, you know, at least you're guaranteed that you're going to have action and movement in the story, that the story is going to progress, and that it's not just going to be 120 pages of wandering around. There's still, with that many pages, there's a lot of room to wander. So, you know, having these things doesn't guarantee that it's going to be a great screenplay, but it does give you the basics of the structure, which is what we're looking for right now. I talked about the hero's journey earlier. Those plot points kind of correspond to certain things in the hero's journey. A lot of times what you'll have is a situation where the inciting incident happens, and then you have to meet the protagonist. Oftentimes you may meet them right at the inciting incident, or maybe a little bit later, but it shouldn't be too late. You want to introduce people to the main character. We'll say, take the example of a detective story. If you have a homicide detective, for instance, and that's your main character, the inciting incident is probably going to be a murder. You know, we might see it, we might actually see it happen on screen, or it may just be someone discovers the body, or we may meet the protagonist and see the body at the same time if you just show up on the scene with the detective there. But you may want to see the detective first before he actually is there at the scene. You know, maybe he is sitting in a bar, staring into his drink, you know, and just staring off into space, kind of lost in his thoughts, and thinking about all the other cases that he's had to deal with through the years. You don't know. You have to find an interesting way to set him up. What kind of character is it that you would picture this person being, and show us their world. That's one of the things in the hero's journey. You want to meet the protagonist in the ordinary world that they lived in before they went on their journey. The plot point at the end of Act 1, oftentimes in the story there's a reluctance of the character to get involved and go on the journey. Like they refuse the call to duty or refuse the call to adventure. And then at the end of Act 1, they accept that call. They take on the mission. So how would you handle that with a detective story? Because a detective, you know, it's their job to go out and solve murders, you know. They get called up, look, we have a dead body, and you need to go find out what's going on, you know. So they're getting paid to accept the mission. That's what they do. That's their livelihood and what they've chosen to do with their life. But you could have a situation where at the end of that first act, there's something so heinous about that crime, or something is discovered at that point that really, for some personal reason, really gets that detective personally invested in the case. And he's like, I'm going to find out who did this shit, you know? And so that could be the thing that kind of moves you off into the second act then, and he's pursuing the killer and trying to find out exactly what happened and why it happened. You get to the midpoint of the movie. Once again, there should be some major revelation. Maybe the character finds out who did it, or he has a very strong suspect, and he's really just sure that this is it. But maybe once again there's a revelation about it that's really kind of shocking, and he finds out, perhaps he finds out that, man, the person I've been looking for is another cop, you know? It's someone he knows perhaps, or someone, a very powerful figure in the city government that has been a friend of his for years. Then that's going to change everything. And once again, it's going to put the character in a little bit more peril perhaps, and make things harder for them to try and get things solved and really get to the bottom of it. By the time you get to the end of Act 2, oftentimes this is referred to in like the hero's journey as the moment where all is lost. It seems like there's just no way that the person is going to be able to finish their mission, to complete their journey or their adventure, their odyssey, and manage to come home alive out of it and achieve success, you know? So if you had a detective story like we've been talking about, well, what kind of event would that be, you know? Maybe he finds out that even more people are involved, or someone really, really close to him was involved in it. Or maybe there's a betrayal where someone who's working with him rats him out kind of to the people who are involved and lets them know that he's onto them, and now these people are after him, you know? So there's extreme danger. Everything is at risk of being lost. He might end up being killed himself, you know? Maybe he's on his own because he knows that there's nobody he can trust and turn to help him with things now. So that propels us into the finale of the movie, the last act, where everything kind of races to the conclusion. And somehow your protagonist has to be strong enough and witty enough, you know, intelligent enough, capable enough to, even though they have been painted into such a terrible corner and it seems like there's just no way out, they can do it. We find out just how impressive this protagonist is, you know, and all their resources that they can bring to bear on things. Let me have a little sip of water here. Don't feel like much of a writer without my usual Starbucks, but I'm focusing on hydration this morning. That third act has to really be satisfying, you know, and that can be a problem, trying to come up with some way that doesn't seem kind of cliche, or where the story doesn't just resolve itself without your protagonist being the motivating factor behind getting it done. But just focusing on the structure for now, by the end of that third act, the person will have solved the problem, solved the crime, managed to reveal to the public everyone who was involved, and everybody knows now what had happened. And maybe those people had been trying to throw him under the bus, get him into trouble to try and keep him from messing with them, and he has managed to clear his name now and things like that. So at the end of the movie, we have a satisfying conclusion. The bad guys got what was coming to them. The hero has solved the crime. And then we meet them back again in their ordinary world, or else into the new world that they are living in now since that journey took place. Those are two other things you need to know. The first scene of your movie and the last scene of your movie. These are things that can change as time goes on, of course, but you need to have something in your mind, some idea. Because a lot of what people want to see is they want to see that the character has changed. There should be a contrast between the first scene and the last scene. Maybe if you saw that detective sitting there at the start, sitting there, you know, staring into his drink, and he gets a call, the bartender sees him, watching him while he's on the phone, and he just hangs up the phone, lays it down, shakes his head, and then just finishes his drink and stands up to leave. The bartender's like, "Got another one, huh, Sarge?" or whatever, you know. Where is he going to be at the end of the movie? You know, is it something where he's decided, you know, it was such a horrible thing, after all the other horrible things he's seen, he just can't take it anymore, and he's decided to just throw it away move on to some other kind of life. This is it. He's had enough. He's going to quit. Or is he right back where he was? And maybe that's the point of your movie, that he hasn't really maybe changed that much. And the whole point of the movie then in that point would be, okay, he's right back where he started. And it helps us understand that he's been through this before. And that's just, that's why he is sitting there at that bar, alone, with, 3 or 4 exes and a couple of kids he hasn't seen in years, because that's his life, the job. You have to figure out what kind of message you want to send to the audience about that character, and whether or not they're going to change in terms of maybe they've moved on to a totally different career, perhaps they just can't hack it anymore, or it's just something within them, something inside them. Maybe he decides he's not going to be spending the rest of his life sitting at that bar. He's still a cop, but maybe he's decided, there's something about that case that kind of brought him back to life inside and made him realize he needs to treasure what he has and focus on the things he has in his life, and be more active in trying to just really make the most of his life instead of just wasting it drinking at a bar whenever he's not looking for a killer. That's kind of like letting the killers win if they take his joy in life away from him. Those are decisions that you have to make. But if you know all those things, those different kinds of plot points, and the basic kind of message that you're trying to send in terms of what kind of character you've created and what you want the audience to feel about him, if you have all those things and you can sit down and write them out, kind of plot it out on that graph, here I am, the inciting incident, and this is where the character is. Plot point 1, what happens? Midpoint, what happens there that totally changes things and gives us a big reveal of some sort and keeps the audience hooked and interested and wondering what's going to happen now. Maybe that you get to the end of the second act and find out that maybe the guy's partner is part of the problem. You have to think about that. What kind of scene would illustrate the point you're trying to make and the kind of peril that you're trying to place your character in? And obviously, the end point of the movie, how you want it to all be resolved, and what kind. You may have certain action sequences that you've envisioned as you've been thinking about the story, because a lot of this, you might spend your daily life walking around thinking about this story and these characters while you're working on this. Before you even get to the point where you're ready to, plan out these plot points and stuff, you've probably got certain scenes in your mind already that you want to include, and go ahead and write those down and place those where they should be on that line. And that's the basics of where you need to be to get started and really conform to the kind of format that most people are looking for in Hollywood, the kind of format that your audience has kind of just subconsciously been programmed to be looking for from watching hundreds or thousands of movies throughout the course of their life. And then we can focus later on other strategies to kind of drill in a little bit more detail in terms of outlining and so forth, and how to really make sure that your story is going somewhere. And we'll get into that later into another video. This is turning kind of long, I see, and I think that's enough as far as just the basics. But I just want to do this for people who are interested in getting into the screenwriting format and just trying to figure out how to really get going and how you want to proceed. And I'll see you in the next part. Thanks a lot.